I've said in the past that I don't think of Pixar as highly as a lot of people, especially folks my age, do. I think a fair number of their supposed classics are actually badly overrated, and even some of their very good films, I also feel are kind of overrated. So whenever I go into watching a new Pixar movie, I expect to enjoy it, but also to nitpick it quite a bit. And that was it's not a fixed mindset, or I try not to have it be, but that was the expectation that I went into Soul with. And while I am not devoid of nitpicks, they are going to be very specific to me, and none of them I actually consider to be flaws in the film. And this was really, really good. And part of the thing is, honestly, I may have simply watched it at the perfect time for me to watch this thing. I watched it to try and unwind from what had been a very bad day. And it hit me in the feels, I think, probably a little bit harder than it might have otherwise. I think it still would have hit me, but yeah, that was that was an emotional gut punch that hit harder than I was expecting and was kind of what I needed, and felt more earned than some of the emotional gut punches that Pixar has pulled off. And when I say that, I don't mean they didn't work. Like, say, take Bing Bong from Inside Out. Oh yeah, that hit me. I cried. But it didn't feel intrinsic to the entire... It didn't... Like, that moment wasn't a culmination of the film. It was a very effective moment that occurred along the way. The part of Soul that hit me is basically the end. What it culminates in. How it brings everything to an emotional climax and gave it the perfect button on it, and I just... I haven't gotten into specifics yet. And that's largely because I went into this actually not knowing very much. I hadn't really watched any trailers since like the first one or two teasers. I didn't know much of the plot beyond the fact that it dealt with a guy who was an aspiring musician who died unexpectedly and didn't like that fact. That was all I knew. And that, honestly, I think is probably a really good way to experience this movie. So I'm recommending it. I think it's good for kids. I think it's good for adults. I think it deals with concepts like death in a way that is digestible and palatable for people of any age. I think it is heartfelt and has a really wonderful, absolutely wonderful core message to it. It's Pixar, so naturally it has, really well cast voices and gorgeous animation, and like actually some really inventive animation too. Some of the things they do with things that I don't want to be specific about right at the front end, but they get really visually inventive with this in ways that I really kind of appreciated, and I feel like I haven't seen from them in a little bit. Or at least haven't seen from them as consistently as I would have liked. But this was really, really good. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to recommend it. If you have Disney Plus, go watch it. Because I'm going to start to talk some more of the specifics, and eventually it'll be flat out spoilers. But even from here, I'm going to start to talk things that I think you are going to enjoy more of the film not knowing. So, we follow Joe Gardner, voiced by Jamie Foxx. And he is a aspiring pianist, jazz pianist, but to pay his bills, he teaches middle school part-time. Teaches music, but he gets sporadic gigs. That's what he wants to do with his life. And he's got this shot to play piano for like this big deal jazz artist, and he's really excited, and he falls down an open sewer hole and dies. And given that it's it is a traditionally very comedic thing to just fall down a sewer hole. I think they did a good job of not of like it felt like the perfect way to go into this, given that this is a kids movie, because it does kill him, and there is an inherently comedic notion to that, but it is still like him dying. So I actually think going with what is normally something used as a joke and having it be sudden, but like having just, but not having it feel like they're playing it for a joke, just doing something that is normally funny, felt like it kind of softens the blow a little bit. For anyone who didn't know he was going to die. So like truly coming in really cold. But when I say the visual inventiveness, the things that we see on what I'm just going to call the other side, there are more specific things labeled. There's the great beyond, and there's this sort of notion of this beginning, and all these other things. But we have these beings that seem to basically be administrators. There's the Jerrys, and there's also Terry, Terry's a piece of work. But I love the visual realization of these beings, that they're sort of created and almost sort of free-flowing out of these glowing lines. So it's like they're two-dimensional in a three-dimensional world, and they're super stylized and super simplistic, and yet at the same time really fit well. Even, I'm going to start doing genuine spoilers now, even later on when we see one of them interacting in the real world and not just this sort of afterlife or, other side kind of a place, it's still really inventively integrated. So Joe, he desperately wants to get back to his body because he doesn't want to miss his shot, because he's felt like he's been waiting his whole life for this shot, and that he died just when he was about to start properly living. And so he's desperate to get back. And through some misunderstandings that aren't worth going into too much, he ends up sort of being the guide for Soul 22, who has been around for a long time but never been sent to Earth, because before a soul can be sent to Earth, they have to find their spark. And she never has. She's voiced by Tina Fey. And to watch the two of them interact and then ultimately end up on Earth, and this is where we start getting into the stuff that I didn't know. I absolutely didn't know any of this. That they end up on Earth. 22 is in Joe's body, and Joe is in a cat that only 22 can understand him when he talks. So now you have the wrong person in Joe's body, as Joe is trying to coordinate 22 into ensuring that he gets his gig and makes it there, while trying to figure out how to help her find her spark, which he believes is like her purpose in life, because for him it's jazz music. That is obviously his spark. So he's trying to help her that, because if she can fill out her badge, and then she could give it to him and actually transfer it to him, because she doesn't want to live. At this point, like, she doesn't care. She's like, I just have no interest. I don't want to participate. So that plan initially she's game for. And so the journey then becomes 22 spending time on Earth and Joe spending time with her, and I'm not going to go through every plot point, but the eventual realization that she does get her spark, but the thing is, a spark is not a purpose. It's not playing jazz. It's not cutting hair. It's not cooking. It's just living. It's just the spark of life. It is just the desire to be. That's it. And she gets that. And when Joe finally realizes that's what the spark is, because, again, I won't explain all the ins and outs of how he does get back into his own body. He gets to play that gig. And the jazz artist, she is prepared to take him on and have him be a part of her band. And he asks, so what happens next? And he's riding the high from the show. And she says, you come back tomorrow, we do it all again. And his face, it doesn't quite fall, but it's this sort of, oh. Like, I've gotten where I wanted to be. Why doesn't it feel different? Because it's just life. You're still living. And you were possibly not even really fully living properly because you were waiting for your life to start, but it's already been started. You've been here. You've been living it the whole time. And I think it was a very smart choice to have it be a character who, had that kind of one and has clearly had some difficulties in his life and has struggled, with family life, with loss, with financial things, so that it doesn't feel like, somebody's kicking back waiting for their life to start because, they're just lazy or whatever. No, he's been trying. He has passion. He just didn't realize what he was missing. And by the end, 22 does. And the moment that broke me, and this is very similar to how Wreck-It Ralph breaks me every damn time. Towards the end, when 22 is going to go down, and like properly this time, not end up in the wrong body, but go down and have her own life. And Joe has realized, like, my time's up. And they're sort of at the edge of this thing where, she can leap down and she can go. And Joe, she's like, but, if I go, that means that you can't, and she doesn't get to finish the sentence, but clearly what she was going to say is you can't live. And he just stops her and says, don't worry, I already did. Now it's your turn. And she's nervous to go down. And he says, don't worry, I'll go with you. And 22 says, no, but you can't. And he says, I know, but I'll stay with you for as long as I can. Damn it. And as a parent who, unless something goes horribly, horribly wrong, will not get to be here for someone who I hope lives a wonderful, full life, but I will be here for as long as I can for her. Yeah, that, what you're seeing here, this is very restrained. I really broke down when that happened at the end of that movie. I found Soul soothing, touching. I did mention I had tiny nitpicks. Shouldn't do this with tears in my cheeks. Some of the humor that goes on in the middle of it just isn't my kind of humor. The sort of the misunderstandings that happen as 22 is in Joe's body and is, Joe's trying to guide her into how to act like him, the kind of shenanigans and misunderstandings and embarrassments that happen as a result of that style of comedy just, it's not what I love. I didn't bounce off it because of that, obviously. But that, for me personally, and my taste in humor, that was the weak part for me. But again, as I said at the front end, I'm not going to call that an actual fault with the film, because it all serves a purpose and it all fits together very well. But it's just a case of the specific technique they decided to use for that portion of the film were things that I'm not a huge fan of. Doesn't make them a flaw, doesn't make it bad. It just means for that bit, I didn't fully disengage, but I'm not as hooked for that middle stretch. But it's a really good movie. And if you're this far into my review, I hope you've already seen it. And if you have seen it, what did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I have a Patreon, which is how I'm able to pay for things like Disney Plus and my bills and food and, take care of my kid. Any amount you're able to help is a big, big help. But even if you're not, like, share, subscribe, they all help me out. Don't feel too much pressure about it, though, because I try and take a relaxed attitude around here. So just come on back next time you need a break.